There's a strange silence that settles over a man when he first stumbles into Carl Jung's writings on the psyche, an eerie pause, like walking into a room where you suddenly realize the furniture isn't to where you thought it should be. Jung had a way of holding up a mirror not only to the world, but to the inner world, revealing truths that feel less like discoveries and more like long-buried memories rising to the surface. And among all his ideas, some mystical, some unsettling, some liberating perhaps, none strike deeper than his reflections on the relationship between men and women. Not because they accuse, or condemn, or reduce either gender, but because they expose a quiet illusion that shapes the lives of millions without them even realizing it. Jung believed that most men don't actually see women not truly, not in their full humanity. They see instead their own unconscious, projected outward like a film onto a living screen. He called this projection the anima, the inner feminine image carried by every man, forged from childhood impressions, cultural expectations, fantasies, wounds, hopes, and unexamined longings. And without the man knowing it, this inner image often becomes more real to him than any woman he meets. This isn't a judgment. It's not blame. It is simply the human condition when the unconscious remains unexplored. Jung once wrote that a man in the grip of his anima projection does not relate to the woman as she truly is, but as the inner figure demands. And this is where the brutal truth lies, not in criticism of women, but in the painful recognition that many men spend their lives interacting not with the person in front of them, but with the echo of their own unhealed psyche. They fall in love with a dream, fear a fantasy, expect a myth, and misunderstand a human being. Imagine a man sitting across from a woman at a cafe. The light catches her hair. The sound of her voice lifts something inside him, and he thinks it's her who awakens this feeling. But Jung would say, it's not her, not yet. It's the inner feminine ideal rising within him, the part of himself he has never learned to integrate. She simply acts as a catalyst, a mirror reflecting the contents of his own depths. Until the projection breaks, he cannot truly see her. And until he sees her, he cannot truly love her. This was Jung's unsettling revelation, that the earliest stage of attraction is rarely about the other person. It is about the inner world bursting through the cracks of consciousness. Most men ignore this because it feels too abstract, too mystical, or too uncomfortable to acknowledge. It is easier to say, "She made me feel this way," than to accept that the feeling was living inside all along. Men often blame women for disappointing them, for failing to match the perfect image shaped by their fantasies. But that image was theirs to begin with. No woman can live up to another person's unconscious ideal. No person can carry someone else's unworked dreams without eventually breaking under their weight. And yet, there is something beautiful in this phenomenon, something poetic in the way the psyche searches for wholeness through the faces of others. Jung never saw projection as a flaw. He saw it as the first step in a long, painful, transformative process. Before a man learns to see a woman as she truly is, he must first encounter the parts of himself that he has forgotten, rejected, or misunderstood. And these encounters often arrive disguised as fascination, infatuation, or even disappointment. Jung believed that this dance between projection and reality, expectation and truth, fantasy and personhood, is one of the most profound psychological tasks a man must face, because the cost of ignoring it is lifelong misunderstanding, and the reward of confronting it is genuine relationship, not only with others, but with oneself. So when Jung delivered his brutal truth, it wasn't directed at women. It wasn't a critique of them at all. It was a message to men, a warning disguised as wisdom. If you do not learn to confront your inner world, you will forever misinterpret the outer one. You will mistake your projections for people, your fantasies for connection, and your unmet needs for someone else's flaws. And the world is filled with men who never learn this lesson, Men who chase the same type of woman again and again, blaming each one when the illusion collapses. Men who crave intensity but not intimacy, beauty but not depth, comfort but not reflection. Men who never realize that what they are seeking in women is actually something missing inside themselves. This is where Jung begins, where the real journey starts, and where the illusion starts to crack. That crack doesn't appear with thunder or drama. It's quiet, almost unremarkable at first, a moment of confusion, a pause in the middle of a conversation, a subtle shift in the way a man looks at the woman in front of him and realizes, maybe for the first time, that she isn't doing what his inner script expected her to do. She isn't responding with the warmth he projected onto her. She isn't fulfilling the role his imagination rehearsed. She isn't behaving like the dream he unconsciously assigned to her. She is simply being herself. And for many men, that moment is jarring in a way they can't fully articulate. Jung believed the shattering of the anima projection is one of the most emotionally disruptive events in a man's psychological life because it forces him to confront a truth he'd rather ignore. She was never the fantasy. She was never supposed to carry that burden. He had placed it on her shoulders without even knowing it. This is where resentment often grows. Many men, unprepared for this realization, feel betrayed not by the woman, but by the collapse of the illusion. They interpret the end of the projection as a failure on her part. She changed, they say. She lost interest. She isn't who I thought she was. But the reality is that she didn't change at all. What changed was the man's ability to see beyond his own unconscious narrative. What changed was the lighting in the room, revealing the shape of a real person where once a dream used to stand. Jung describes this moment almost like the breaking of a spell, a kind of psychological disenchantment. And if a man doesn't understand what's happening inside him, he often reacts with frustration, disillusionment, or withdrawal. He may leave the relationship, assuming the fantasy can be found elsewhere. He may chase another woman who seems to embody the missing qualities he projected. And for a brief time, the fantasy will return, shimmering again with the same intoxicating glow. But eventually, inevitably, the same crack will form. The illusion will fall apart again, and the cycle will continue. This is the pattern Jung warned men about, the one so many ignore because it's easier to chase a new dream than to turn inward and meet the parts of the self that ache to be understood. Jung wrote that a man does not become whole unless he confronts his own inner feminine, meaning that he cannot grow, cannot love deeply, cannot form a stable bond, until he integrates those qualities he keeps searching for in women: sensitivity, intuition, creativity, emotional intelligence, gentleness, and acceptance. When a man avoids this inner encounter, something tragic happens. He begins to resent women for not embodying the qualities he has disowned in himself. He criticizes them for being too emotional, while secretly longing for emotional understanding. He accuses them of being too sensitive, while craving the sensitivity he wishes he possessed. He complains they are too complex, while running from the complexity inside him. Jung saw this as a form of inner exile, men banishing parts of themselves, and then becoming angry when they cannot find those parts in the women they choose. But the moment a man begins to reclaim these qualities within himself, something shifts, something subtle, yet profound. He stops expecting women to complete him. He stops seeking a mother in a lover. He stops looking for emotional salvation in the eyes of another person. He stops handing women the impossible task of healing what he refuses to look at. And then, for the first time, he begins to truly see women, not as projections, not as symbols, not as fantasy figures shaped by childhood wounds, but as human beings, complex, flawed, beautiful, contradictory, sovereign. This is the breakthrough Jung considered essential. The collapse of the projection becomes the doorway to authentic relationship. And ironically, It is only after the fantasy dies that real intimacy can finally begin. Because intimacy is not two perfect people meeting. It is two imperfect people recognizing each other beyond illusion. A woman sensed when she was being idealized or misunderstood, Jung believed. She could feel when a man was not relating to her, but to a dream he built before he met her. This creates a strange tension. She wants to be seen, but she can't compete with the ideal. And the more she tries to fit that image, the more she loses herself. Eventually, she grows resentful, exhausted, or distant. Not because she doesn't care, but because she cannot play a role in someone else's psychological story forever. Jung would say, the woman breaks the projection to save the relationship, even if it risks ending it. Because only by stepping out of the fantasy can she step into her own reality. And when a man is ready, truly ready, he sees the gift in this. The moment the fantasy dies is the moment the real person emerges. And that's where the soul meets another soul, not the unconscious meeting its own reflection. And once a man steps into this clearer vision, something inside him softens, not in weakness, but in strength. There is a grounding that happens when the inner storm settles, and his gaze no longer climbs the impossible heights of fantasy. It drops instead to the human level, where truth is quieter, steadier, and infinitely more intimate. Jung believed that when a man integrates his anima, he no longer chases the emotional high of infatuation. He seeks instead the deeper, slower resonance of connection. He stops craving perfection and starts valuing presence. He stops worshiping the dream and starts listening to the woman in front of him, not to the echo inside his mind. This shift changes the way he loves. It changes the way he speaks, the way he listens, the way he touches the world around him. He no longer feels threatened by emotion because he has made peace with his own. He no longer seeks validation from a relationship because he has found it within himself. He no longer fears honesty because he can finally withstand the truth about who he is. This is what Jung meant by individuation, the lifelong process of becoming a whole, conscious human being. And women feel this transformation instantly. A man who has integrated his inner feminine stands with a certain calmness, a grounded empathy, a presence that doesn't try to impress or control or prove anything. He is not looking for a mother. He is not looking for a savior. He is not looking for someone to carry his emotional baggage. He is simply ready to meet another person as an equal. This kind of man cannot be manipulated by fantasy because he has already walked through it and survived the disillusionment. He cannot be swayed by superficial qualities because he has outgrown the hunger for surface-level gratification. And he cannot be broken by heartbreak because he understands that every relationship is not merely an encounter with another person, but a meeting with the unknown parts of himself that still seek expression. Jung insisted that love is not a possession or a contract, but a transformational force, a psychological fire through which both partners refine each other. And when projection falls away, that fire becomes purer, less clouded by expectation, less dampened by illusion. But here lies Jung's most brutal truth, the one men continue to ignore because it asks more of them than they want to give. Most men never reach this stage, not because they are incapable, but because the world rarely teaches them to look inward. Society encourages men to seek fulfillment in achievement, in status, in admiration, in romance, in the next conquest or accomplishment. It teaches them to chase the outer world while neglecting the inner one. And as long as a man searches outside for what is missing inside, the projection remains intact, directing his relationships from beneath the surface like an unseen puppeteer. Jung warned that a man who refuses to confront his anima often becomes trapped in a loop of repeated experiences. He dates the same type of woman. He falls into the same arguments. He faces the same disappointments. And he walks away believing that all women are the same, never realizing that what remained constant was the projection he carried from one relationship to the next. And so life keeps handing him the same lesson, wrapped in different faces, until he is finally willing to see the truth behind it. But the moment he does, the moment a man dares to ask, "What is this woman revealing about my inner world?" the cycle breaks. Awareness begins. Healing starts. And real connection becomes possible. Jung believed that a man who accepts this responsibility becomes not only more capable of loving a woman, but more capable of loving himself, because he is no longer searching for someone else to fill the gaps in his soul. He fills them consciously, through introspection, through shadow work, through the courage to examine his own patterns. And from that place, relationships cease to be battlegrounds of projection and become instead arenas of growth, reflection, and shared humanity. Women feel safer with such a man, not because he is perfect, but because he is present. A truth he has earned through struggle, introspection, and the humility to face his own unconscious. This is the transformation Jung pointed toward. Not a theory, not a philosophy, but a lived reality. A journey that begins with the shattering of illusion and ends with the emergence of genuine, grounded love. A love rooted not in idealization, but in recognition. Not in fantasy, but in presence. Not in projection, but in soul. And if you're still here, still listening, still reflecting somewhere deep inside yourself, then perhaps you feel the gravity of this message. Jung wasn't trying to expose women. He was trying to wake men up, to pull them out of the dream, so they could finally see the world, and the women in their lives, with clear and conscious eyes. The brutal truth is simple. If you do not explore your inner world, you will misunderstand the outer one. But the beautiful truth is equally simple. The moment you begin that journey inward, everything outside begins to transform. If this message stirred something in you, if it made you question, reflect, or see your relationships through a new lens, then share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe if you want more journeys into the psyche, more stories that challenge, awaken, and illuminate. Because this work, this inner exploration, is not just psychology. It is a lifelong calling. And every step you take toward understanding yourself brings you closer to the world, closer to others, and closer to the man you were always meant to become.